The Long Way Home, Chapter 43, officially one of two. Jason's cabin in his parents' quarters was too large. It was familiar, comfortable, homey, and everything that he remembered. But the whole of the Long Ways galley could have fit in the room. Well, most of it could fit anyway. It wasn't meant for him to do all that much more than sleep in while he spent the rest of his time elsewhere aboard the Among the Startides we sing. His parents' quarters were one of the smallest suites aboard, and it felt too large. Rather, it felt too empty. Vincent and Cadet had moved in across the corridor and 3 doors down, and his Aunt Helen and Uncle Calvin had moved into a larger quarters on account of his new baby. Another cousin and Cadet got to live a little closer. The empty feeling of his cabin wasn't helped by the knowledge that one or both of his parents would be called back to duty soon. They'd been given leave from the Medical Corps of the Republican Navy for his mother and the Republican Naval Infantry for his father. In fact, most of his uncles wouldn't be aboard much longer, either. The ones who didn't retire still served in one of the services, except the Army, obviously. Some of his aunts, too. The thought managed to make the cabin feel too empty. The rest of the quarters was just like he remembered it, down to that familiar melancholy at the knowledge that his parents would be on deployment again soon. Usually, the Navy managed to alternate their deployments, but usually isn't always. It was part of why he was visiting the hearts longed to be brought close in the first place. That and the family was worried about Tundre. Divorce was rare in the Droll clan, and more rare in the bits of the considered close kin by the George family. And neither Tundre nor Uncle Nendril had taken it well. She had come to Jason, full of delight that Uncle Nendril had decided to join the We Sing more permanently. The bond among Tundre, Cadet, and Jason was well worth the minor inconvenience of living on a ship with sections of Terran gravity. The latest grav belts were hardly uncomfortable at all. There was more joy in the fact that Tundre and Cadet would be aboard the same ship as him. He had cousins and friends to reconnect with. In particular, Stefan was more than happy to strap on gloves with him. Stefan also started calling Jason Cyclops, which made Jason snort with laughter every time he did it. That was unfair of his cousin, because he did it in the middle of sparring to create openings to punch Jason square in the nose. Most of his other cousins and friends tried to be more sensitive as they saw things, but Stefan knew that jokes were the best way to make Jason feel better, or a very good way at least. That brought another thing to reconnect with, his studies. His Aunt Helen was in charge of scooting aboard, and it was a coin toss over whether she was more irritated that Jason's abduction had put him a year behind, or that the boy didn't want to waste time, as he sought on things in recovery. He figured even if he had things to recover from, he could still read and write, and that was all that needed to work for studying. Cadet had gone quiet and watchful again, and Jason had to draw some of the older kids aside to explain things to them. The Cadet took a while to put his prickles down, that making friends made him nervous, and a little patience would go a long way with him. They invariably asked something along the lines of, "You want us to be patient with somebody, you," which Jason tried not to hold against anybody. He never thought he was at all that impatient. No more impatient than anybody else, anyway. But there it was. They let Cadet tag along and watch without trying to make him join in, though. Well, they invited Cadet to join in all sorts of things, and only pressed a refusal with a single "Are you sure?" Vi continued to struggle with her physical therapy, and had precious little time to spend on anything else. However, Jason made sure that he made time and gathered Tundre, Cadet, and Isis Magdalene to go visit her in one of the med-base recovery rooms. They got to know Vi's family that way. Her mother and father, Sam and Brix, took to their little crew like a doting aunt and uncle, while the 2 younger pups decided that the new big kids were mobile pillows. They often stayed so long that the nurses chased them out. Even so, Jason didn't quite fit into the space he'd left. He was different now. In many ways, he'd grown. In other ways, he'd been hurt. Jason's parents knew that, and they knew it from more than his missing eye and shortened braid. 2 weeks after returning home, Jason came out of his cabin to fix himself breakfast of cold leftovers, only to find his parents seated in the kitchen table with grave expressions on their faces. "Jason," his father, Maxwell, began softly, "you've put off talking long enough." "What is there to talk about?" Jason asked as he took a seat across the round table from them, and at the piercing look from his mother, he amended, "What should I talk about?" "We sat down with Vincent, and we wrung a story out of him, the whole story." Maxwell's voice was incongruously hard, brooking no argument, and gently comforting, offering no judgment. "This is an MH-approved ship. We have help handy." I'm regulating, Jason said defensively, and both of his parents raised eyebrows at him. Jason found himself fingering his eye patch and snatched his hand down to the table. I am regulating. I'm not wallowing in the memories. I'm not moping in my cabin alone. I'm keeping up with my exercise and catching up on my studies. Slow going on catching up, but I figure I'll get there in 2 or 3 months. Jason, you've seen combat. You've seen combat, and you're dodging getting an eval, Bridget said seriously. It won't do, Jason. It won't do. I don't want anything in my records that'll make enlisting in the RNI harder, Jason admitted. I know what it is, like you said. I saw combat. Mom, I have to be a lost boy one day. I have to. There are other paths of service, Bridget gently told his son. You do well in the Navy, in the medical corps. Jason shook his head ruefully and told his mother, if this trip showed me anything about myself, it's that I was made for the fight, made to buy time with blood. It's just who I am, Ma. I can't help it. As if the Navy doesn't fight. As if every trooper on the table isn't a fight against death, Bridget snorted, while her husband grinned smugly at her. Ma, Jason said, in placating tones, I know that the Navy fights, but that's not the kind of fight my courage is for. You know as well as anybody, I shake out of my skin if I take a hand at a station, and it wasn't any better with the little ship. My courage is for dirt under my feet and a weapon in my hands, and that's just how I'm made. And when they put you through psych screening and enlisted, what if you aren't regulating as well as you think you are, JJ? His father asked. Did you consider that maybe by the time you're old enough to enlist, you might still not face it down? I've seen combat too, don't forget. It's useful, believe me. Jason drummed his fingers on the tabletop and tried to meet his parents' eyes, a tough trick to pull off considering there were 2 of them. I'll go talk to the counselor today. Now, about the missing eye, Bridget said briskly. I suggest a clone replacement. Somebody did a decent job removing it, and that's no small help. But Ma, Jason sputtered, I was thinking of getting an Orc. You're too young for an Orc, she snapped. I'm past my halfway, Jason contended as he drew himself up in his chair. It's not a matter of your halfway, Bridget snorted. You're not past puberty. Then why can't I wait? I'm doing just fine with one eye as... Jason tried to argue, but he trailed off under the flat look his mother gave him, and he found himself grumbling under his breath. I wanted to be able to see in infrared. Meanwhile, Vincent found being around people for more than a day at a time less uncomfortable than he expected. True, he hadn't exactly been alone for a while, but that was different. Traveling companions turned family through peril was hardly the same thing as taking up residence on a passenger liner with hundreds of crew, and God only knew how many passengers. It didn't hurt that Max, Victor, Samwise, and Benign George all treated him like he really was their brother, right down to teasing him about his balding tail. The crew quarters deck was enormous, and Vincent found no need to go into the ship's public areas. He'd come to realize that such figures as Maxwell the Loyal, Victor Doom, Cookie, and Padre were people under all the stories. He guessed that folks would have to learn the same thing about himself one day. Every conceivable amenity, or at least any that Vincent could want, was on that deck. From the excellent weight room, to a full gymnasium, to what was called the sparring room for any kind of exercise that he could want. Both Terran Standard and International Standard Gravity were each of those amenities. So Cadet 2 could keep up with the exercise regimen and improve on it with more available equipment. Vincent would have moved into quarters in the lighter gravity for the boy's sake, but he insisted on not being too far from Jason in case the older boy got lonely. Luckily, quarters just down the hall had opened up, so he and Cadet made themselves at home. But a place to sleep and somewhere to keep it weren't the only things that made the crew quarters deck such a fine place to not leave. They also had a galley with a whole team of cooks working around the clock to service all the watchers and a dining room with comfortable, pleasant, sturdy furniture. That was handy since he'd gotten used to better meals than the cans of bean of his spam warmed on the stove. Vincent found that the cooks and staff for the crew were more than merely competent, and quite good. The crew dining room was where he met Rose. They met daily, usually for coffee in the morning, but sometimes they shared more than one meal together. They spoke about everything from the most frivolous of Vincent's interests to his serious considerations of taking up permanent residence aboard the Among the Startides We Sing. Vincent didn't exactly know what to say to or think about her quite serious statement that if he stayed, she'd have a good reason to stay too. Hadn't she found somebody younger and less battered by a hostile galaxy to be interested in? Apparently not. They talked about her too, of course. About her captivity, about how catching up with her sister Brianna, and about Penelope. Vincent had a strange sense of responsibility for them, though what in the world he could do to help with the struggles they faced was beyond his ken. He asked the other freed captive anyway, and was troubled by the answers. She had no living relatives, and her parents, humans, had also been killed. Worse, the young woman had taken the news of her solitude so hard that neither Rose nor Brianna thought that she could be trusted alone, even with a worry like that to drag on them. Vincent had begun to grow cheerful. However, he was beginning to feel the itch of a working man gets when he's idle too long. From his youth in Her Majesty's Royal Navy, to his happy years on the farm with his family and his humans, to even the days of the vengeance and the long way, he was always working towards something, even if that something was the next shore leave or harvest. The itch was made worse by the fact that even the Georges, who were clearly aboard on leave from service to the Republic, had jobs to do. Those men and women slipped into those jobs like knives into old sheaths, like calloused hands into weather gloves. They slipped in while Vincent stood out, idle. He must have radiated discomfort like a beacon, because Irish George sat down beside Rose while he was busy trying to figure out just what to do about what he was starting to feel without invitation from either of them. Anybody with eyes could see that Irish George was a hard woman. Most without eyes could probably see it. Her long, braided steel grey hair was up in a tight bun, and if she wasn't as filled out with muscle as she once was, her thinning arms were a long way from frail. But it was the undaunted certainty behind her grey eyes that made even the most lackadaisical fools sit up straight. Without a word of greeting or preamble of any kind, she said to Vincent, "You need a job to do before you drive yourself crazy." "That obvious?" Vincent asked, mainly to buy himself a couple seconds to change gears. "Normally, we'd give you a month or two to settle in, but I've heard that you've gone to the armory to clean all of your firearms twice a day for 5 days straight, and haven't fired one of them in the range. I know a man finding things for itchy fingers to do when I see one," Iris said with a strange mix of wry humor and snapping orders. Her eyes shifted to Rose, and she said, "You have the guest right as a guest in this household for as long as you require it. Most planetists don't really understand how that works, so if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask anyone of the crew." Her face twisted into a grin as she said in an even more wry tone, "You could even go into the public decks and brave the media to take advantage of our nicest amenities if you really want to." "I think I'll stay down here, thanks," Rose answered acerbically. "The apartment you gave us has a little kitchen, and if it's all right, I like to cook." Iris nodded and said, "You can ask the galley master or the quartermaster for whatever supplies you need. It'll be good for you to make what you want when you want to. You COP or Republic?" "Neither," Rose answered. "True Indy, yet another colony called Hope." "Well, this is a clan ship, and as good as Republican soil wherever she happens to sail. And as a Terran rescued from captivity, you have the right to protection from the Republic wherever you come from. You just have to file one request to become an official civilian of the Republic. If you want to," she jabbed a bony finger at Vincent and said, "you're all but an honorary citizen as it is. All you have to do is accept to make it official. Speaking of official, we'll want to make your adoption into the family official and legal as well, which would make you a civilian into the Republic. Your boy, too, once you adopt him officially." All Vincent found he could say was Torrent was, "Officially?" "Now where is Lawrence?" Iris asked the heir. "He was supposed to be done running drills by now." Lawrence George was there, kissing the top of his wife's head, as if summoned, saying, "You forgot that we took a new crew up before we left to go looking for JJ. They're having a hard time getting up to standard." If I stay, I might decide to become a Republican. It depends on if I have a reason to stay," Rose said, with a significant look at Vincent. Lawrence sat down beside his wife, and in her company he seemed even more solid than he did leading his sons and a daughter aboard the Wee Rage. "We'll be making a stop in 3 days," he began with simple certainty. "Had a word to the station and both Republican and Star Sailor consulates. We took the liberty of preparing all the paperwork ahead of time, and if you're going to submit anything, I think you should double-check things to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes." "Officially?" Vincent asked again, feeling as though he may still topple out of his seat. "So far as anybody in the family is concerned," Iris told him with an impatient snap in her voice. "You're already family. The law doesn't agree, though. It's not enough that you acted like any of my sons. It's not enough that you brought our blood back from peril. We have to sign papers, as if paper is what makes anybody anything." "We feel that making the adoption official smooths the way in certain situations, like inheritance or if somebody needs to use power of attorney, God forbid," Lawrence said with steadfast patience. "Besides, if you're a Republican, you can't be taxed by other governments for work you do in the Republic, which the Wee Sing counts as. I get the feeling that you want to settle in here, and that means putting your hands on a piece of line and holding with the rest of us." Vincent coughed, took a sip of coffee, and mused, "I'd like to make myself useful. Not sure what I'd bring to the table for a passenger liner, though." "Seems like you're good with kids," Iris said briskly. "I think Helen could find a use for you." "Do you know about mountaineers?" Lawrence asked as he casually slid a steaming mug in front of his wife. "I think so. Isn't that a sort of boys' group that goes camping? Your spaces, though." Iris scoffed loudly while Lawrence patiently explained. "We have a strong tradition of joining the R&I in the family. Some choose other services like the SAR Corps or even the relief fleets, but the work is often dirt side." "There are plenty of us with enough sense to not set foot on decks of a proper ship," Iris snapped teasingly at her husband, who rolled his eyes as if at an old joke he pretends irritation at. "We also have a strong tradition of preparing the kids for the service. God knows what the service can take, even from the softest children, and whip them into adults. But people expect more from a George," Lawrence explained with a hint of sadness and pride both tinging his voice. "Hence why we encourage kids to join the Mountaineers and the Mountaineeresses. Among other things, every child is different." "Oh," Vincent said to that. What else was there to say? The chief's capabilities suddenly made a lot more sense to him. He acted like he was raised to be tough because he was. By tough people. "Well, I guess I'm qualified to lead hunting outings and teach how to track. I know that humans can't track by smell, and I know the methods. I'm also a halfway decent small craft pilot." Vincent wasn't exactly sure how to feel about the hammer and the anvil laughing so heartily at something he'd said, but he knew it was embarrassing when Iris snapped out, "You can make a ship dance, son. You're more than decent." "We peeked into the logs of the Long Ways computers," Lawrence explained, and Vincent wished he could go invisible. "I don't suppose shuttling passengers back and forth between dirtside and decks would be as exciting, but another pilot is always welcome." "There's one more thing," Iris snapped, which Vincent was coming to realize was a normal tone of voice. "If you wish to keep custody of Cadet, you're going to have to make his adoption legal. He's a runaway, and if his legal guardian hasn't made any efforts to bring him home despite the boy being caught stowing away on several ships, she didn't even request help in the form of passage for herself for the boy." The aging woman's voice hardened with contempt as she reached the end of her explanation. "It should not be difficult to prove that the boy had been abandoned before you found him." Even Lawrence's steadfast and sturdy voice was heated with anger as he said, "And if she wants to make trouble, now that her abandoned child is a little famous, she'll learn what it means to be caught between the two of us." Vincent coughed and said, "I got a letter, an email, really. I'm surprised you didn't know about it already. I'm sure the Chans and your crew saw it." Before Vincent could go on, Lawrence interrupted with a snort of laughter and said, "I know they have a reputation for gossip, but aboard this ship at least, Digitans know to give biological crew their privacy. Well, anyway," Vincent recovered awkwardly, "I'm apparently being offered citizenship." Iris's eyes sparkled with pride as she said, "Like Captain Lena Chen and the Warp Speed battle wagon." "Will you accept?" Vincent began slowly. "I think that maybe I will. God knows my own government is going to want to pin something on me, but that's something the Republic doesn't offer very often." Truth be told, Jason wanted to wriggle out of going to see a counselor. For all each of the dozen of them were all combat veterans of one sort or another. He even extended that to Dr. Alessa, who had been in the SAR Corps, but SAR work is closer to combat than most people care to admit, and is often on the heels of just that, and you'd starve on the difference between them. The trouble was that he told his parents he'd do something, and as far as Jason was concerned, telling his mother and father he would do something was as good as giving his oath before God himself. Therefore, he dragged his feet down to the quiet section of the crew quarters deck, where the counselors kept their offices. Men and women, some related to Jason, some merely crew on his home ship, padded up and down the corridors carpeted length on their way to or from one of a dozen doors. Jason didn't look well enough to recognize anybody. Privacy. The struggle of his crewmates were their own unless they chose to share them, just like his were. Well, he'd gone to see them. He never said anything about talking to them, except that he knew better. More than anything, more than how he wanted to serve as an E-scale for the infantry for his entire military career, once it started. More than wanting to make the cut for the Lost Boys. More, even, than his desire to uphold the George name. Jason wanted his mother and father to always be proud of him. So he sighed ruefully to himself and picked one of the doors at random. "Enter," a woman's voice chimed, and Jason didn't dawdle. He stepped briskly into the office of Lieutenant Commander Dr. Brianna LSR and resisted the urge to snap off a salute. He wasn't in any service, and that kind of thing would only invite laughing at him. She didn't look ready to laugh, sitting behind her Spartan desk as she steepled her fingers and studied him over her half-moon spectacles like somebody looking at something important teetering on the edge of a shelf. She was a big kitty woman. Grey and lighter grey fur showed a tiger striping pattern on her face and arms below the short-sleeved shirt. White tufts were collected at the ears even as they tilted away in concern, and a glimmer of retracted claws showed near her fingertips. They had all registered in less than a heartbeat as she asked, "We were wondering when you would make your way down here. What can I do for you?" The office was nearly silent. Two comfortable-looking Terran-sized chairs stood waiting beside the desk, arranged almost like they expected friends to share tea in their promised recline. Or maybe whiskey, knowing the men who crew this vessel. The women, too. There was an oil painting done by hand, Jason was almost sure, of a boat on an alpine lake with a fisherman in it, on a wall where it could be seen from any of the seats or from the entrance where he stood. Only one entrance. He felt his shoulder blades itch as he realized that fact. He decidedly stepped further into the office before he said, "I went through some stuff. I think I need to be evaluated." "You say that like you think I'll down-check you on your next deployment," Dr. Elisar said. In this context, she was a doctor, rather than an officer of the SAR Corps. Jason understood that rank and its prerogatives could hinder the work she did here. With a start, Jason realized that he was distracting himself by analyzing things about the situation. "Maybe not that, but," he trailed off, leaving his uncertainties unspoken. The doctor heard them anyway. "You think that you can regulate on your own without help, but how can somebody tell that?" "Aye," he answered softly, carefully. "You know, I don't have any authority to do or order anything concerning you, right?" She asked pointedly. "But you're legally required to record any diagnosis, and some conditions can. Doctor, I have a dream for my future." There was an air of relaxation about the doctor, despite the fact that Jason couldn't see whether a whisker had altered in her posture or expression as she gently told Jason, "Since you're a civilian and still a child," Jason's spine stiffened and she arched an eyebrow at him as she clarified, "legally speaking, I'm sure in some other ways, more than others, you're still a child. Because of that, the evaluation and diagnosis are sealed. You'll go through screening like anybody else. What I'll do is help you process the stuff, as you call it, that you went through." "Oh," Jason muttered. He decided he didn't like standing there with only the door to his back, so he glanced at the chairs and asked, "Should I sit down?" "Please do," the doctor said, as she stood and began making her way around the desk to take a seat while Jason took his. "Let's start with this. Why did you decide to take that chair instead of this one?" Jason blinked and looked over the little office again as he realized he'd taken the chair closer to the door. He was even half facing the door, keeping it in his limited peripheral vision. Did he want to make sure that he could escape? No. He realized it wasn't escape that he thought, and spoke out once. "If there was an attack, I'd be closer to the threat than you." "Do you think that there are enemies on this deck or even this ship?" The Among the Star Tides We Sing filled the silence between them with her thrum as Jason's brow furrowed in thought until he said, "No. I don't know why I expect an attack, except maybe boarders, but we're not along the hull." "Do you often find yourself preparing for attacks like this?" Dr. Elisar pressed gently, and Jason cast his mind back for the answer. And so it went, answer following question. And all the while Jason found himself more at ease with the doctor as she asked questions that made him think about his journey, without his care for the other children and Vincent coloring his thoughts. For once, Jason found himself thinking over what he went through, and what he'd gone through. She didn't try to guide him, and when the topic changed, she helped Jason to stop and examine why it had changed, or if it really had at all. By the time he told her that he was through talking for the day, she said, "I'm encouraged that you talked so long. If you want, I'll schedule you in for an hour a day from now on to answer the questions you're going to ask. You're regulating pretty well, all things considered, but not as well as you could be." "It's to be expected, though." "Every day," Jason objected. "I hardly have enough time to keep up with my exercise and studies and take care of the others as it is." "I can't order you, Jason," she answered with a calm insistence, "but I do recommend you take me up on this. Every day, or every 2 days, or twice a week, or at least once a week. I strongly recommend that you keep regular appointments with me, or with one of our other counselors if we aren't good fit." Jason settled in a comfortable chair again. It was a devious trap. He was reluctant to stand again on account of how comfortable it was. Twice a week, he grumbled, as he realized that settling back was a bad way to get ready to stand up and leave. Do I have your promise? She asked as if she knew well what she was asking. Jason levered himself out of his chair by his armrests and grumbled further. Aye, you have my promise. Good, good. I'll send you the open slots tonight. I suggest you keep your parents in the loop, but you don't have to. And unless you display signs of self-destructive or violent behavior, I don't have to tell them anything either. I wouldn't have come, except I told them I would. Jason snapped irritably as he strode towards the door as quickly as his feet would carry him. He took a breath and calmed himself before he said, I'm sorry. He sighed. It's just that I already have my stupid nickname. I tried to stay off social media, but... Dr. Ellison scratched a note in a leather-bound notebook and murmured, Here, you're just Jason. Just a young man who's done and seen things that most people don't have to think about. But still, just yourself. Only you. Thanks, Jason choked out as he stepped back into the corridor. He decided that the experience was decidedly odd. He had no idea whether it helped anything, and said so to his parents when they asked him about it over dinner in their quarters. But he didn't think it made anything worse, either, which he also told his parents. They were heartened that he agreed to continue the sessions. They helped him select Tuesdays and Thursdays, in the full knowledge that would cause a delay due to their arrival at the station orbiting the fledgling Exarch Reformation colony. Zuma Station was probably more populated than any of the towns or even the capital city below. But a station is always a massive help to interstellar trade and transit, and if he was aware of those details about their destination, they wouldn't have interested Jason very far. What did hold his interest was the fact that the station also housed a consulate for the Star Sailors, which would probably have at least one Republican attaché with enough authority to witness filing the necessary paperwork. The magistrate would be the important thing. Vincent had accepted, and would give his oath to formalize his adoption. For the other, paperwork could wait until they reached the system populated enough to have a Republican embassy or consulate. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.